Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me today is Lynn Lawrence of Brio. She's a mental health coach, and you use horses as part of your mental health coaching. Is that right,
Yes,
Lynn?
I do. Yes,
Okay.
I do. I basically I help people who are who've lost the joy of life, who are experiencing dark times, find that joy, and I use horses to help with that.
Cool. And Brio, can you explain I love the name Brio.
I work with Pasafinos, which is a Spanish breed, and when a Paso goes by, there's a certain sparkle or energy or exuberance that a Paso has, and they call that their Brio. So I want to bring that to people's lives. So it's con Brio.
Ah, and so when you say mental health coach, what does that mean exactly? Do you work with in a clinical sense, or is it for anybody who is struggling with, say, anxiety or depression? Is it just kind of open to anybody, or are there certain people that you work with?
First, to make the distinction, coaching is not therapy. Coaching is its own unique thing, kind of what like what you do with riders and horses. So this is open to anybody, and it's open, which is why I liked it, because it's available for anybody if it's a serious problem, if you're feeling just a little bit off or whatever, it's anybody can benefit from this because it teaches um, you that you're already perfect inside. You already have innate mental health. Sometimes it just needs a little tweaking. And I liked the positivity of that.
Yeah. And I interviewed a lady who specializes in heart math, and there's a lot of research on how I forget what it's called exactly, the space between the heartbeats, that horses are naturally more coherent in their regulation of the heart, and that within 10 or 15 feet, it actually has a positive effect on people.
Well, see, and that's what I love about this is people are always up in their head. They've got too much going on and they're not just enjoying things, at least that I found. And so I start off with just grooming a horse. And I don't expect a person to have any horse experience. There's no requirement for having any physical abilities. We're just going in, we're grooming the horse, brushing out his mane and tail. And it's within minutes, the person is already, their brain is slowing down, their breathing gets slower, and it's like when you watch a horse react, their eyes, they blink more, they just move completely different with by being next to a horse.
Yeah, and I am with you. I think the number one thing, if I could put it in a nutshell, especially working with adult riders and adult beginners, is learning to come back into our body. Like, I think we spend so much time in our heads that with horses, it's so tangible, it's so physical, it's so kinesthetic that it starts to bring us back into our body.
I totally agree, and I think that people don't realize the power of their bodies, that like after we groom, I
Oh, you
and
broke up a little bit. Say that again.
after we're done grooming, we go down to the round pen, and we do really simple things that anybody can do. I'll show the person how to ask the horse move off into a circle, and the different speeds. And I'm demonstrating the way this is done is the energy that I'm putting off. It's not because I've got some whip out there beating him to go faster. It's because I've raised my energy level and I'm asking him to go forward. And people think it's kind of like a magic trick
Yeah.
until they do it. And I had a teenager out, and I hadn't really thought about I was not a good teenager. I was I was a teenager. We'll just leave it at that.
I think
And
that's why
when
we found horses. Yes.
exactly. So my when she got in the round pen, she was kind of doing the typical teenage girl, yeah, whatever, and rolling her eyes. And the horse mirrored that back to her. She said, okay, well, go ahead. And he's like, no. And she was like, well, he went for you. And I was like, well, pull your shoulders back. Let's get a little energy. Focus with me on this second. And by the time we were done, he and her had really bonded together, but she didn't realize that she was putting off that, or didn't care that she was
Yeah.
putting off that energy that of essentially disrespecting him. And so he was just like, well, I'll disrespect you back. And horses have so many mirror nerves that when they see a person come in, I can tell what that person is feeling or what energy's inside them because I can just look at my horse and say, oh, well, he's really tense or he's very disrespectful, and it comes right out.
Yeah. And so have you looked into that at all, like the mirror neurons that you're talking about?
I have I'm kind of studying it right now because the basis of it is horses have the most mirror nerves of all the animals because they're a herd animal. So they look to the lead mare, and if the lead mare is calm, they mirror that. If the lead mare is getting nervous, they mirror that because they don't want to waste energy being nervous if the lead mare is calm. So they
Right.
want to fit right in with that. And I think that they want to do that with their humans too.
Yeah, and that's what I find is the horse's survival mechanism. Their skin sensitivity is higher than the human fingertips on their barrel. I found
Wow.
that fascinating. And
Okay.
so the ubiquitous
Yeah,
cat.
that'll
Yes,
happen.
of
Yes.
course. I think my cats are outside. Um, but that skin sensitivity, which is actually highest around their barrel where we sit and where we put our legs. And I always think of it like little antennas that they're picking up through skin sensitivity, all of this nonverbal communication, which is what we call energy. But
Yeah.
that constant communication that's going on, and then these mirror neurons, is it's a survival mechanism in the herd because just like you say, nature does not waste energy, right? And every day, horses in nature have to seek food and water. So as soon as we offer food and water, it's like I find some horses as a horse trainer can start to have some of those mental health issues that people have.
Yeah, and that's I rotate horses that I use because I don't want to stress the horse that because sometimes people come in too high energy, too keyed up, and I don't want to repeatedly expose the same horse to that because I want to give them a chance to just chill also.
Yeah, because it's a two-way street. And I think part of not only coming into our body when we work with horses, but really refining our own senses of nonverbal communication. I mean, we do that all the time, but we rely on our brain, we rely on verbal communication. Here we are on a podcast, but really that the tone and the frequency, the energy, all of that is even a part of verbal communication. And when
Right.
you're working with a horse, I think that's one of the things that really comes to the surface.
That's what I have found, and I have found that it's easier to explain. Some people feel like everything bad comes to them. And so when we're in the round pen, and I'll show them that the energy, if they've got their shoulders slumped and kind of withdrawing, that seems to encourage bad energy, for lack of a better word, or for a horse. And if we're using the horse example, a horse can dominate that person because they're shrinking into themselves. And so when I work with them, the whole thing about your body position, is your chin up, do you have your back straight, or are you slumping, makes an entirely different picture to the horse. And that's when we do roughly 7 sessions, and by the end of it, the person comes walking in with a bit of a swagger. They understand what they're putting off to the world, and it
Mhm.
makes a huge difference in everything else.
And I find that too, that working with owners and horses, some people who have exactly what you describe, a lack of self-confidence, self-effacing, um, kind of, I don't want to say victim mentality, but they
Yeah.
they they just haven't found their inner power. And a horse, I always wondered why a horse will sort of pick on that. Like a horse will actually act more aggressively towards people like that. And what I
Yes.
realized is when you have that in a herd, it can sacrifice the safety of a herd. And so they
Yes.
sort of don't tolerate, horses don't really tolerate that kind of internal weakness, which I find incredible.
Yeah, and I'd never thought about it like that, but that's exactly true of what I've seen. And I think as humans that we don't call that out and say, well, there's got to be a proper way to call it out and say, hey, this is what you're presenting to the rest of the world. And I don't think that there's a lot of mechanisms to teach people that, okay, you're not a victim.
Right.
These things may have happened, but now we're, you have to develop your own mojo again, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and even I did years and years of volunteer work at a couple of different rescue organizations for horses. And one of the things that really struck me was horses don't do that. They
Yeah.
don't, like even horses that were coming in with a body condition score of a 1, or horses that had been physically abused, abandoned, neglected, all kinds of bad situations for these horses. The horses never saw themselves as weak, which I found so interesting. They don't have the capacity to sort of feel sorry for themselves.
Yes. I agree. And I think the thing about Pasafinos is they're very sensitive horses.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
They are
um,
hot-blooded for, yes, they're in the hot
yes, and
blood category.
that's why I love them, because they're so full of energy, and they're happy. They like people. They want to show off for you, and they want to they just make you feel good. Because if for you, I had a woman, and she was in the round pen, and she is the dog trainer, so she knows about working with animals and stuff. And I could see her getting more and more on herself, and I'm going, what's going on? And um, my horse just came in, and he started nuzzling her, and she started crying, and she started telling me that she'd been assaulted in the past,
Mm,
and just being around and being with the horse brought that out. But at the same time, she was receiving instant, you're okay, you're loved. Um, I'm with you with this from my horse. And he automatically knew that that's what she needed.
wow. And you find that happens pretty frequently, like the horses might tap into what the person needs even before we can.
Absolutely. The horses show me what's going on.
Mm.
And it's like you kind of innately know if a person walks in and they're just kind of, they may seem somewhat calm on the outside, but it's like they've had too much caffeine. They're just
Yes.
the horses know that. So they'll spend extra time snuffling them, and kind of, you can watch the horse's breathing slow down. And when as the person grooms them, they start to match what the horse is doing. So I guess we have our own mirror nerves, but they calm down, and they listen to the horse breathe, and listen to him lick his lips, and it just it refocuses them, and puts them on an even keel.
Hmm. Yeah, and part of that is, I think, like we discussed coming back into your body when you've been living in your head. And
Yes.
I think mental health coach is a great term because it is about it's almost too much mentality, not enough
Yes.
physicality. And it's like just coming back into the body, slowing the breathing, doing something slow, doing something tactile. And I don't know what it is. I mean, all animals have this gift for us, but with horses, maybe because they're just so big and because they're also prey animals. You
Yes.
know, it's a totally different psychology, it's a totally different way of looking at the world when you have that prey animal psychology. And I think that also helps with us shifting our perspective and
Yeah,
getting
and
out of our head.
I think that um mostly the women that I deal with feel like prey. I mean, they wouldn't
Yeah.
know to say that, but they feel like, everything is out to get them. And when they can see a horse and I talk about the horses are prey animals. That's why they're always alert. Their ears are always going.
Hmm.
Um, I think that they can really relate to that. And when they see that, a horse has gone on doing his own thing and has that back to the Brio, when the horse has a pride about himself, that he's got that energy, I think that they internalize that also.
Oh, yeah. And I used to always say everything I learned about being a strong woman, I learned from my mare.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, they definitely teach us. And it's a kind of like horses, we even call in cars and rockets horsepower, right? So
Yes.
horses and power, those two words go together. And yet I watch horses carefully avoid my cat who's laying in the path of the lunging circle,
Yeah.
right? Or the chickens used to sort of walk right underneath them on the cross ties and they
Yes.
would look down and it's like, or how gentle they can be with a person or a child. It's like,
Yes.
here's this huge, powerful animal, and yet their power is it's unquestionable power, but it comes with a softness. And I
Yes.
think
And
that teaches us a lot about feminine power.
I think so. And like I brought my horse out into the breezeway when a person got here, and she's like, would now be a good time to tell you that I'm afraid of horses? And I was like, yeah, that would have been nice to know. And the horse comes out very calm, has his head down, and just very okay. You're good. And within minutes, she's brushing him and brushing out his mane and just going, wow, you're really nice. And it just brought out such a happy change in her that I don't have to be afraid of something big. And
Yes.
I have found that through the sessions that it's funny that a lot of the women that were very closed and uh, not willing to come out are by the end of the sessions talking about maybe I should start a business or um, maybe I need to move on in the work that I'm doing because they're all of a sudden they can see horizons that look good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how that happens. Like to me, that is just a sort of magic that
Yes.
that happens just by being around horses. And I think that's why we get called crazy horse people, is
Yes.
because it is a world within a world that once you experience it, you're sort of like, oh, this is why people like revolve their whole life around owning a horse.
Exactly. And it's I get a lot of word of mouth with where people who weren't too sure about this whole horse thing. And
Hmm.
then it's like, wow, this really works. And they suddenly evolve I want to be in nature. I want to be outside more. I've got a person who's planting her first garden now because she just part of the I'm on 5 acres, so in the spring and summer, I have a butterfly garden. I've got some bird boxes up, so like I've got two screech owls that are frequently on the property, and I've got sandhill cranes that come here. So I try to really get people out of being in the office or being inside and just enjoy the outside for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, in my place, the same way. I think, especially if you keep horses on your property, you end up as a gardener because what are you going to do with all
Yes,
that horse shit, right?
yes,
It's like you
absolutely.
always end up gardening if you have horses. But yeah, I think that is part of it is like I'll even deal with horse owners and what will be coming up in the horse problem that they have is a lot of times their own anxiety level or their
Yes.
own depression or their own disempowerment or fears. And it ends up, I kind of half joke that I'm like the accidental therapist sometimes between the horse and the owner
I
because the horse's problem that they're calling me in to fix a lot of times has to do with the dynamic in the relationship between the horse and
yes.
rider. It's not,
I find that when I ride, that I'm looking at, I'm more aware of the horse and rider combination. And like I have a friend who's very high energy and very not confident. And that's very hard on a horse because they want you to be their leader. And if you're not confident, they try to take over and it never comes out good.
yeah. And that's just it. People, I think, people think of the dominant horse as the biggest badass in the pasture, the
Yes,
aggressive one, the one that's beating everybody up. And that really isn't, if you look at it from a perspective of survival and nature, that's not efficient. That's a
right.
huge waste of energy. And so the lead horse is the one that provides the safety, the smartest
Yeah.
one, the calmest one, the one that can think, the one that makes good decisions for the group is always voted as the leader. And I go, the lead horse is more of a parental role than it is
Yeah.
the badass, right?
Yes.
And when people start to understand that, then the horses immediately start responding differently.
Yes.
And I'm sure it must be fascinating from your perspective to see your personal horses put on a different costume with different
Yeah.
people.
It's interesting because like I said, when I was dealing with a teenager, my horse who always is he always wants to please me, always does exactly what I say. He was just like, no, I got no time for you. Talk to the hoof kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had never seen him do this. And I'm like, it dawned on me actually a little bit later that I was like, he was acting just like her. He totally mirrored what she presented to me. But at the same time, it's kind of odd because this is not my niche, but I had an 8-year-old high functioning autistic boy here. And his parents are like, he loves horses. Can he just come out? And I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to be honest with you. Um, as you said, Pasapinos are a little hot. I
Hmm.
don't know what he's going to do with a kid that's not um, is able to control their reactions. So we brought him out, and the little boy he was wonderful. But my horse looked at him and checked him out, and he was just calm and cool. And the little boy came up to him, flashing his hands and stuff. And I'm like, and the horse backed away a little bit. And I said, you need to go a little slower when you come towards his face. And he's like, oh, okay. And after that, he always moved slowly. And my horse was just loved him. And he was like, oh, this is a friend.
Yeah.
And the little boy was so excited because he didn't, I already think he's perfect, my little boy. So I'm not coming in with an attitude, there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And he my horse isn't going to say there's something wrong with you. And they got along so well. And it was just, mom and I were both crying because it was like, here's a kid that's had a lot of rough stuff happen to him. and he's out with the horse, and he's just like, he's go, I want you to go, or I want you
Yeah.
to stop, and he was total control, and I was such a blessing to see that he loved it so much.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, that, leadership comes in small packages, in
Mhm.
quiet ways. And what the horse was feeling with that child was safe.
Yes,
And I go, that's what horses are looking for. When they vote for the leader, it's the one that helps them feel safe, that is
yes,
non-threatening. And I think that's why horses respond so well to kids, is
yes,
there's no agenda lurking behind the mask. And it's like the energy
exactly.
is just pure. It is what it is.
Yes,
And
and
it's like kids can go around and flail and do all these things that we can't get away with. And it just isn't threatening to the horse. So they feel
yes,
safe. And that's the energy of what I would call true herd leadership. It's not
yes,
who dominates physically. I go, that construct of our mental picture of what leadership means. I go, the horses could teach us a lot about that.
yeah, and I think that too many of the women that I've dealt with only see bad leadership, pushing around, or
Yes.
being overly
The
aggressive,
aggressiveness,
and
yes.
it's yeah, and this shows you the difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness, because I need my women to be assertive and say, yep, I want you to do this, because if you're not putting off the energy that you can do this, it won't work.
Yeah.
Because yeah, my horse might know what you want, but if you're not going to
They don't
say,
have,
no, I really want it, it's not going to happen. He's just going to eat grass, basically.
yeah, or the response of the horse to the autistic child. I go, that authenticity, I think, is
Yes,
what horses really respond to.
yes,
And when I did natural horsemanship, I learned a lot of techniques that work with the horse's mind. And they almost became psychological weapons. And I left the whole genre of natural horsemanship for one reason, that I noticed that I have to be more authentic. It's not about how I use my body and my energy alone.
yes.
I actually, like, there was one rescue horse that had come in as a stray. I go, who has a stray horse, right? It took animal care and control 3 days to catch this horse. She was highly defensive. I think they had to trank her to catch her. So we put her in this little 1 acre paddock. And when we started feeding her and she started feeling better, she got harder and harder and harder to catch. And finally it went 30 days where with every trick, everybody knows nobody could catch this horse. So they were going to bring in a cowboy to rope her. And somebody called me and said, hey, can you come in and catch this horse? Because nobody can do it. And she had learned every freaking human trick in the book of how to take the treat and still not get the halter on her head, right? And how not to be just like the last step of maybe fastening the halter and she would take off. So she knew every trick in the book. And the only thing I could do with her was look at her straight in the eye and approach really slowly and think to myself, I'm going to put a halter on you and it's going to be okay. And she let me catch her. But it was like that authenticity of,
Yeah,
I'm not going to pretend that I'm not going to put this halter on you. She
yeah,
knew the difference. And she knew every little sneaky tactic and psychological tool that the humans could come up with. She had been there, done that, and learned how to outwit it. And the only thing that worked with her was to just say, like in my mind, constantly thinking, I can put this halter on you and you can feel safe. We can do both,
yes,
right? And
yes.
that was the only thing she responded to.
That's funny.
Yeah. It still took hours. Like
Oh,
it
I'm
took a
sure.
long time, but it was that kept reducing that defensiveness.
Well,
It,
and I think there's something about when you say in your mind, I'm going to do this. I think that you also are telling your body, and accepting the whole thing. I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And so like when a woman says, when I ask her to move the horse off, she has to in her mind say, I'm going to do it and I can do it. And I think that
Mm,
there's a something there that um so many people are just broken down with, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough. And none of that applies in this. And when we're in the round pen, it's you and the horse, and it's you can do this because you are strong enough. You are able to do this. And I
yeah.
think once they realize uh, you're right, being authentic, that this is their authentic self. It's not the
Yes.
person who's going to be beaten up. It's not the person who is cowering all the time. There is a person in there that wants to say, I can do this and I can do it well. And that's what I'm trying to bring out.
Awesome. That is, and I believe like you do, it lives inside of every person. It lives
Yes.
inside of every horse. And I go, sometimes you have to kind of sweep the dirt away. Sometimes you kind of have to dig it out. But I go, it's in there. And I look at every horse the same way, that what we often call, when I get called in as a trainer for bad behavior, I go, behavior from the horse's perspective is how they communicate. They're
Yes.
nonverbal. So what is it they're communicating to you through the behavior? That's what they're
Well, and
trying to
that's
tell you.
one of the things about traditional therapy, and I have been through traditional therapy before, is that they're assuming something's wrong and that the behavior should be fixed before the thought. And this, what I do, is coming from, okay, there's a thought, it's creating a feeling that creates a behavior. So you can't just fix the behavior. Like you can't, if
Yes.
you eat too much, you can't just say, I'm not going to eat. You need to go back and look at the thoughts that are behind it. And that's a different way for me to be thinking. And it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Or behind the thought is the belief, and what's behind the belief. And
Right.
and somewhere under there is an authentically powerful, unique soul. I go,
Yes.
in a person or a horse.
Yes, absolutely. And I think therapy, the thing that I had a problem with is that people are like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be in therapy for 3 to 5 years and it's going to make me feel like crap. And this, that doesn't have to happen. You can start, like if you're working with my horse, you can suddenly, in very short time, say, there is good in me, there is strength in me, there is positive in me, and build from that.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's when I look at, that's why I call myself more of a horse trainer than a riding instructor. And people go, what do you teach? And I go, I teach people how to train their own horse.
Yes.
And I go, within that process of building a relationship or training your horse or developing your horse or whatever we call it. Oh my God, there's so much stinking therapy. I go,
Yes.
it's just gonna happen. I
Yeah.
go, so it's just that process of how horses work, and so much that gets labeled as bad horses, difficult horses, problem horses, bad behavior, fix my horse in 30 days because something's
Yes.
wrong. Like that's what
Yes.
you're describing in traditional therapy. That's traditional training.
Yeah.
And I go, here's the real problem. Your horse feels defensive. As long as your horse feels defensive, you're in the sympathetic nervous, your horse is in the sympathetic nervous system, and all the behavior is going to reflect fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all
Yes.
of that. And so I go, why is your horse defensive? Let's get to that. And underneath every defensive horse is a gentle, loving, beautiful horse that's looking for a relationship because that's their herd instinct.
How do people take it when you say your horse is defensive? Something's going on here.
I don't really say it quite that directly, but and I'm not blaming the person, because human instinct and the way humans think is makes it difficult for us to see through the horse's eyes. It's difficult. It's a kind of a
Yeah.
learned skill. So I don't blame people for being people, but I go, you just being a person can make a horse defensive.
Yes.
Right. So
And
if
yeah,
we go with our predatory instincts, we're most likely going to trigger prey animal instincts. And that's where the defensiveness is coming from
I like
most
that
of the
because
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that's what I think with most of my people, that they already feel like prey animals and that they need to run away from situations. And it's it's just because of what's going on in the world and how things have happened to them. But at the same time, like a horse, they need to also live moment to moment, day to day, as opposed
Yes.
to, oh, all of this baggage is there. And I know horses carry grudges and they
Well,
have,
that's the fascinating thing about the horse's brain. They have exceptionally good memories, but they
yes,
don't have a capacity or imagination, and they have a limited capacity of choice. So the horse's choices are sort of binary and they're happening in the moment, in the present.
yes,
So they do remember the past, but they don't, they only live in the past until they have a new experience in the present. And I go, that I think itself is something we can learn from horses.
yeah, absolutely. That's I will be using that with some of my women because it's um, every the whole thing about thought is, your brain creates 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day. And it's going to happen. You can't control what thought comes out next, but you can control what you do with the thought. And that took a while for me to just say, oh, here's a thought. It doesn't make me feel good. So instead of just thinking another thought about, well, I don't like to feel good, I'm getting depressed and all this, you can also derail that and say, well, that thought needs to move on by. I've got other things to think about. And like with working with horses, even if I have a dark thought, I go out with my horse or whatever, and my brain is focused on a different thought. So I'm not having to dwell on depression or anxiety.
Right. Right. And like, I think the power of the human brain is we can sit in our living room and go into fight and flight with
Yes.
thoughts, right?
Yes.
And we can actually get stuck in that limbic system, in that
Yes.
survival mode. And that's defensiveness in the human
Yes.
living, and that's what I see with the horses is one of the big things is can we help ourselves and our horses shift into
Yes.
dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system? Because without that, it's very difficult to access the higher part of the brain.
Yes.
Right. And I look at people no different than I look at horses. I go, a lot of the problems come from um, long term or too much time with a sympathetic nervous system dominant. And again, that comes back to what are we thinking about? What are we focused
Yes.
on? Are we in our heads? Are we in our bodies? Are we in
Yes.
the past or the future? Are we in the present moment? And
And that's the big thing, is be in the present moment. And people don't realize the power of that. If you're
yes,
not thinking about the past, you're not worrying about the future, but just being in the moment. And I think with a horse, you have to be in the moment because, they are big, they can be dangerous. You have to be aware of what's going on and tune everything out. And that the changes that you can make by just being right here is
yeah.
incredible.
Am I safe right now? Am I safe
Yes,
right now? Right now, right
yes,
now, right now. And then I worked with a lady just the other day who has a lot of fear of her own horse because she's been ducked off a couple of times. She's had the horse a while and the horse has had sudden explosions. So we're kind of getting the two of them back together. And her horse is coming along a little bit faster
right.
because just in a lesson the other day, where she goes, I need 45 minutes before I get on, and I don't have that time today. But in her mind, that's the time she needs to be able to trust her horse before she gets on. And I
Yeah.
go, okay, so could we look at your horse right now? What is your horse's body language telling you? What is your horse's energy telling you? Could we look at that right now rather than walking in thinking, I always need 45
Yes.
minutes? Could we start to, what do you feel right now? And what does your horse feel right now? And her horse was fine. Her horse was like completely chilled out, ready to ride. But she goes, oh, I'm having the anxiety.
Yes.
And I go, okay, so it doesn't matter if you're the one who isn't quite ready or your horse isn't quite ready. You guys need to be ready together. So what do we need
Yes.
to do for you?
And see, I don't
Right?
think people are aware of, they may say, oh, I'm having anxiety, I'm having depression, but these are words that people throw around, and it's already, they don't realize the first steps of, oh, I'm starting to get a little nervous. They let it build up, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I'm having an anxiety attack.
Yes.
And the awareness is, I want to help people become aware of it, but it's it's a challenge at first because it's so easy to get overwhelmed before you say, oh, enough.
Well, and I think that's part of the power of what you do is getting people to tune into the nonverbal part of communication that is the only way you can communicate with horses is you have to start noticing the changes in energy levels, the
Yes.
changes in body language, the changes like long when people contact me and they go, all of a sudden my horse bucked me off. In my mind, I'm going, oh no, there were at
No,
least
it's,
20 warning signs before
yeah.
that happened. Yeah.
Well,
And
and that's one of the things in the round pen. It's like, I'll when I ask him to go around, I'll say, okay, look at his ears, what are his ears towards us? Is one ear away from us? Um, is he moving relaxed? What Start noticing these things about the horse, because after, and I don't say this, but after they notice it about the horse, then they start to say, oh, I'm feeling a little uptight now, and
yeah,
they can catch it earlier.
yes. And that is the key for safety with horses from
Yes.
a horse owner's perspective is horses are very good at knowing what happens before what happens.
Yes.
So like the mare that could not be caught, she knew once somebody gets a halter on me, things are not good for me.
Yeah.
And so she got better and better at noticing what happened. First, she noticed what happened after the halter got on. Then she
Yeah.
said, okay, what if I can avoid it? Then she learned every human trick to get better and better at avoiding getting into that situation. And I go, horses are kind of logical that way.
I was gonna say that's smart in my mind.
Yes, exactly. She was just protecting herself.
Yes.
And and so when people start to notice changes in energy level and body language, you start to, as a human, notice all of those little signs. Like you're saying, what happens before the big thing happens?
Yes.
There's a lot of little things that happen. And when you can pause there or give yourself a moment to think, that changes the experience in the moment.
That's exactly correct, because it's sometimes like if you hear something or see something, pause. That's a simple answer. Just pause. Take a breath before you do anything, because it changes. Instead of having a quick negative reaction, you may say, oh, I know why that's happening. Like my horse was being disrespectful. He was being bitten by a fly. Well, that's a good reason to be disrespectful in my in my mind. So if you just take that second to pause before immediately reacting, it keeps you in the present, and it gives you a way to look at the whole situation, to see why it's happening.
Yes. Yeah. And I think from horses, I've really learned that you change the past by changing the present.
Yes.
I mean, especially working with, I was particularly interested in rescue horses because a lot of people out there are studying wild horses. And I got interested in studying rescue horses because I want to know how our systems, the human systems, how are horses doing in the human system and where are we failing horses? And a lot of it came down to not being observant of horses. Like they have pretty simple needs. Number one, they want to feel safe with whoever they're with. And I go, but as long as we're acting out in human instinct, or we're not even considering being 50% of that energetic partnership, I go, then horses just become more and more defensive. And that to me is the number one cause of failure in the relationship, is just not understanding how the horse needs to feel safe. And so as soon as we, like, for example, if a horse, I'll use a different example, say, won't stand still at the mounting block. I go, a lot of times they're avoiding what happens while they're being ridden because they know better than us what happens before what happens. So, okay, they get
Well,
to the mounting block and go, yeah, no, I don't like this deal. I'm going to become defensive and not deal with it. But by going back to the mounting block and changing the horse's experience in that context, you don't train them to stand still at the mounting block through technique or condition response or, obedience training or anything like that. You change the experience of what the
yes.
ride was like, what waiting at the mounting block is like. And as soon as the horse brings in the feeling of safety to that context, you don't retrain them over and over. They just do it.
Well, and I think that's the feeling of safety and of having a say in things is what most people are missing in their lives. They're like,
Mm.
I got to go to work, I got to pick up the kids, I got to do this. So you don't ever feel like you have a say of what's going on. And I think that puts people in a very uncomfortable position. And I'm not even sure that they recognize it for a lot of the times
It can
because
be pretty intangible.
yeah, exactly. And then you talk about emotional exhaustion and you go back and look at it and you say, okay, well, you lost control of your life, essentially, is what they feel like.
Yes.
And that it's better to, when I look at a horse, I'm like, okay, he lives in the moment. He's looking to see what's going to happen. And he he thinks on it. And I think people need to spend more time being made of becoming aware of what's going on in their life, because I think we end up so tired and so cranky and just out of sorts because we're not staying in the moment and we're not focusing on things that are are good for us essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And horses have no choice in their life. You know what I
Yes.
mean? They have no choice. But what they want is to have their opinion heard.
Yes.
They want to voice their opinion. And they want to make simple choices. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's it's kind of like teenagers. I go, okay, they don't have the capacity to really think long term.
Yes.
So we do need boundaries with our horses, but otherwise they are individuals. And
Yes.
that's where horses that get labeled as difficult or dangerous or crazy or lazy or stupid, it's like they just have learned, like you're saying with people, to either avoid the situation entirely or it's a learned helplessness, like a learned
Yes.
powerlessness.
Yes.
And I think even maybe what you're doing as a mental health coach is giving people the space to have an opinion, to find something different in their
Yeah.
experience.
And I think that's why people end up start looking for, maybe I need a new job, maybe I want to start a business, because they've suddenly realized that um, they have an opinion. It's
Yeah.
not, oh, I got I got to go to work 9 to 5, and then that crushes your soul. I hear a lot, but they, even if they say, okay, I'm going to stay in my job, but I'm more comfortable with it now because it's my choice. I can, you know, I'm safe. I've got my decisions that I'm making, and I'm I can get happiness from that, being comfortable like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, if you go back to the traditional term for training horses is breaking a horse.
Yes.
And I go, just that thought It's like we don't want to break our children and we don't want to
Right.
break our spouses. We want to have a relationship with them. And I call it starting a horse, like
Yes.
starting an education. But breaking a horse, it's like it just makes my skin crawl because
Yeah.
obedience training, psychological tools, leverage devices, all of that stuff that you can force and leverage and make a horse do what you want. And I think people do it to people. So I go, we may as well learn from our horses. But that's how a lot of people approach horse training, that this is an animal to be subjugated and
Yes.
we're gonna make them do it. And then there are these horses that are like, have at it. You can't make me like it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that we do that to people too. I mean, it nobody it's nobody wants to say, yeah, I'm having a bad day. Nobody wants to say that I'm not okay right now.
Mhm.
And it's something that you need to appreciate in yourself and say, okay, I'm not having a great day, but I'm going to take these steps to help. And I think society is just wants to, force you into things, and people feel like their choices aren't there, even though they are there.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's something I learned from the horses, that even though they have no power in their life, we buy them, they don't buy us. We
Yes.
picked them, they didn't pick us, right? We have the agenda, they really don't have an agenda. We have the ambition, they don't have ambition. I go, so and then we decide where they're going to live, when they're going to eat, all of that,
Yeah.
right? But within that, horses still find a way to monkey with us. They still find a way, kind of like teenagers, I guess, or children. They still find a way to get themselves to feel safe and feel comfortable within those
Yes.
parameters. And I go, that actually is powerful. It's they never lose a sense of themselves.
Yes. And you can horses have every horse has a different personality, and they they keep a personality even when they're put in really bad situations. And I think it's easier for a person to just uh, do the personality that's expected of them when they're in hard situations. And the horses that I've seen, um, there's a sparkle in their eyes. There's always something there.
Yeah.
And I help out a couple rescues, and um, it's it's like the horse is in there just waiting to come out and express himself, if you just will look at him.
Yes. And they do it quickly.
Yes.
They do it very quickly. Like people will think, oh, I can't go get a rescue horse because they have this horrible past and they're never going to trust people. And I go, that's really a rare exception.
Yeah.
And it's actually how I can tell. The horse will tell me its story, that if that horse has actually suffered physical abuse, those are the ones that will have the hardest time. They'll trust people
Yes.
very selectively. But most horse abuse is neglect or ignorance. And so 90% of the time, the rescue horse lets go of the past as soon as they experience a better present.
Yes.
And I go, they make perfectly good horses because horses don't hold on to the past as soon as they have a better option.
And I think that what causes so many problems with people is that we don't let go of the past. We just
Yes,
dwell on it.
that's people are more
And
complicated, is how I put it.
yes,
I go, our
yeah, that's
powerful brains make us more complicated.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think being around horses helps them to see that the past is not helping them anymore. If it helps them to see that they can um, move on from where they are, because if a big old powerful horse can do what you're asking him to do and still be happy, I think that changes how people look at their past and can
Yes,
they move forward.
absolutely. Absolutely, because they the amazing part of working with rescue horses was they're always sort of looking in the present for the best deal possible.
Yes.
That that sort of, I guess we could call it hope, maybe in the human
Yeah.
terms, that
Yeah.
something better is about to happen. It's like that's what the horses are always looking for is,
Yes.
and they can become defensive, anticipating from the past, just like we can. But as soon as there's a change in the current energy, they start to have that hope right away
Yes.
that something could
And
be better.
that's what I'm trying to bring out in women is to have hope. Because it's when so many bad things happen, unlike horses, we do dwell on it and we get defensive and depressed. And um, people need to know that that can change. And there's a quote, and I don't remember who said it, but it's never too late to have a happy childhood.
Yeah.
And it's because you can dwell on whatever you want on your childhood. You can dwell on a day that you walked to school and it was a beautiful blue sky, or you can dwell on the fact that your teacher yelled at you for making a mistake on a paper. It's your choice. And I hadn't really thought about it like that, but it's very freeing to say, oh, I can think about good things instead of having to, in my brain insisting on thinking of deep, dark thoughts or dwell on things that you don't want to think about, even though you keep replaying them in your mind.
Yeah, and that becomes a heavy weight to drag through
Yes.
life. That's a lot to carry, to let the
Yes,
past
it
affect the
is.
present. And one of my favorite cowboys used to say all the time, especially watching professional level trainers have it out with, these semi-feral horses that were starting under saddle. He
Yes.
would say over and over during these colt starting events, it's never too late to take a fresh start.
Yes. I
Just
love that. Yeah.
stop. It's never too late to take a fresh start. And you can take a fresh start any moment, and you can take them thousands of times.
Yes. And people just need to be reminded of that. And I think horses and all animals show you that, yep, what you did 5 minutes ago doesn't matter. I'm going to jump in your lap and purr like these guys are doing.
Yes. Yes. No, and is there anything else you want to talk about that is unique to how you work with people? Before we run out of time, I want to talk a little more about your business. This has been a great conversation, though.
Yeah, I've been having a great time. Basically, what I do is I have a series of approximately 7 sessions, and no session is actually planned. It's just what today
Comes up.
brings. And I think that especially with working with horses, people get to see, okay, someday the horse wants to be involved, some days he just wants to eat grass, and it's okay either way. And I think that that's freeing for them to say, okay, circumstances happen. This is what it is today. And I work a lot with people with anxiety or depression to reestablish joy. And it seems like when you're depressed or anxious, that's very hard to come by. But when you start breaking things down into simple steps and looking at your thoughts and in this case, spending time outside and just being surrounded by fresh air and being able to relax, it really changes people's perspectives.
Absolutely. I think what you're describing is the more we're in our minds, the more we have this need to control, which
Yes.
means we have a plan. And I
Yes.
go, there is no better animal on the planet than a horse to throw a monkey wrench in your plans. It's like
Yes. And that's
you
what
just
we,
can't
when we talk
plan.
about planning, it's, do you know what the next step is? My goal may be way out there, but can you just take the next step? Don't worry about steps 2 through 1,000,000 because
Right.
nothing's going to go the way you think it is anyways.
Right.
So we, we
Right.
might as well just accept that and just say, okay, I know the next step and know that there's a greater power saying, I want good for you. I'll help you with the next step once, once this first step is taken. And that, to not be weighed down by, oh, I have to do A, B, C, and D. I can just work on A and we'll see where B, C, and D goes. Because like I started off saying, I want a master's and doctorate in counseling. And as I'm looking at all these things, I know that they didn't fit my personality and how I think, how I want to work with people, because I want them to be happy soon. And and so my plan got derailed and I started looking more into coaching because it fits how I want to help people.
Mm,
And it's, I don't know what the next step is, where it's going to go from here, but I know that I'm on the right path for me. And I want to let people see that there is a path for you. And let's just take the first step on it.
yeah, and I think what's so refreshing listening to you, Lynn, is from a mental health perspective, that same fundamental philosophy that drives everything I do is that the healing, you already are powerful. There is nothing
Yes,
wrong with you. That healing
yes,
comes from the inside of you. It's not something
yes,
anybody else puts in you. And there's nothing
yes.
broken that you have to fix.
And
It's,
that was such a huge thing for me to hear the first time.
yeah,
I was like, no, I'm broken, I'm depressed, this is wrong and that's wrong. And it's no, I'm perfect inside. I may have to tweak my thinking a little here or there, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me.
right.
And that's just such a different way of thinking.
Yeah. And that's what attracted me to different trainers or different genres of training was the original attraction to natural horsemanship was there are no bad horses.
Yes.
And it's a matter of understanding the individual to bring out the best part.
Yes.
All parts live in there, including the best part. Maybe
Yes.
all we're seeing right now is not the best part, but that best part lives in there. We can be certain of
Yes.
it.
And I think that's when you start feeling that about yourself, then you can realize, oh, my kids aren't all bad. They're
Yeah.
perfect.
My
Same with the
husband, my
spouse.
spouse, yes.
Yes, exactly.
No,
And
and I
it
have
just
to
gives,
laugh. People will often say, I'll go, what's your goal? And they go, well, I just want to have a good relationship with my horse. And I go, so as relationships go, you're talking children, spouse kind. I go, that's your horse. Your horse wants a relationship with you too, but you don't get to control everything your child does. You don't get to control
exactly.
everything your spouse does. It's a relationship.
Yes. And I think horses really show a give and take on that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they do reward you when you try. Um, and I think sometimes humans are not as good at that. So if you can try with a horse and see, yep, he appreciates the try, that your spouse may not get it right now, but if you are consistently try and consistently have a different way of thinking, things will change.
Yeah. Yes. So where do you work, Lynn? And tell me just a little bit about, I'm going to put your contact information in the description box
Perfect.
with the podcast, but you are in North Florida.
Yeah, I'm in Morriston, which is kind of between Ocala and Gainesville. Nobody knows where it is. I'll just tell you that
Okay.
ahead of time. Um, and I can do, because I'm kind of out of the way, we're in a very horsey area. Like we have trails that go directly into the Gothi Forest and stuff. So, and when people come in, they'll see people driving carriages down our roads, and
Mm,
so it's a nice neighborhood. But I can do, if for people who are a little further away, I can do longer sessions with little breaks, like say a day at a time, so that
uh,
people can see what changes they can make. I also do by Zoom, but unfortunately I can't Zoom my horse down to you.
right,
Um,
right.
so it's the same information, but it's unfortunately without the horse, which is the
Yeah,
best part.
that is kind of the best part. Yes. Worth the trip, I have to say, worth the trip,
Exactly.
especially if you're not a horse person or if you're afraid of horses.
Yeah.
What you're offering is such a It's a gentle introduction
Yes.
to
It's
horses, and it's a
it,
no pressure situation.
exactly, no pressure, very gentle, and I maintain safety at all times. I'm also an attorney, so I worry about liability. Um,
Yes.
so I make sure that that people understand and how to do simple blocks. Oh, the horse is getting too close into my face, so
Mhm.
block. And so everything is designed for a person who doesn't know about horses.
Great. Great. Well, we better wrap it up there. We've
Yeah,
been yabbering for about an hour.
I've had a
So,
great time.
oh, this was fantastic. And I haven't seen you in years. This is, I mean, and this is the adaptability part we learned from horses is we had no, I never do a script. I can't write a lesson plan. I can't do a script. I can't, it just
Same
has to
here.
be in the moment. And so thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it. And it's fascinating. I'll put all of your stuff in the description box below. And thanks everyone for joining us for another Horse Geeks podcast with Lynn Lawrence of Brio, ConBrio, with
Yeah.
sparkle. I love that. Okay. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.